Welcome, everybody. Welcome to our Branchville watch party. This is Zeev, Director of Marketing at Netafim USA. We're going to be waiting for a few minutes to let everybody join. If anybody has any question or any comment, we have a chat box. You can add your comment. If you want to share where are you coming from today, where are you joining us today, you can also share from there. I'm going to put my phone in mute. It's probably a good idea. Somebody joining from Virginia. Welcome, Keith C. Hello, everybody. Thank you again for joining. Really excited to be here today in our Branchville party. We have somebody from South Africa. Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining today. Thank you for sharing your location. We have a lot of events associated with hemp this season, and we had a lot of international attendees as well. So it's not surprising to have somebody from out of the US, and wonderful to hear somebody from South Africa. Smoky, California. We hear you. Awesome. Welcome, everybody. We're going to get started in a few seconds. Again, we want to welcome everybody to this party. My name is Zeev. I'm with Netafim USA. Awesome. We have growers from all over the place, organic growers, Arkansas. Stefan Pollack, how are you? Wonderful to see friendly names, existing friends and new friends to the family of Netafim. Awesome. We're going to get started. And again, thank you everybody for joining. And welcome to the Branchville Watch Party. My name is Zeev. I'm with Netafim USA. We're really happy to have you here. We're excited to host this event. Again, if you have any question, please share through the chat box. And before I go ahead and introduce the participants of the panel today, I wanted to share a little bit about Netafim and what connects us to this story. Netafim is a big believer in hemp. In general, we were one of the first, or maybe the first drip irrigation company that got involved in the hemp industry here in the US. Throughout the last few years, we were involved in multiple projects. We believe the plant is amazing. We're excited about the new crop in the toolbox that opened for farmers in the US and all over the world, and also for not farmers in the US, creating a whole new industry through the entire supply chain. This story is also in South Carolina, which is one of the first states to jump on it and really jump on it in a very smart way, in a very integrated way between the state, the Department of Agriculture, university involvement, and farmers that wanted to jump on the hemp adventure. So we really enjoy meeting a lot of people in South Carolina and understanding better what South Carolina is thinking about when addressing the hemp market. Hemp in general, we believe, is an interesting business case. a beautiful plant with so many applications. We hope it remains an economical engine despite recent downturn in pricing, as we all know. And one day we even think we will have dripper line made out of hemp. As we know, hemp can replace plastic, can replace cement. There's so many things going on in hemp, CBD oil, of course, and so on and so forth. Another reason why we love this story that our friend Darren, Farmer D, Jofi brought to Netafim initially was that this story really connects agriculture in general, hemp in particular, drip irrigation, with the promise that we all are here in order to generate economical development throughout the world. In this case, Kevin Summers was inspired to go back to Branchville, reconnecting with his farming background, his family, his community. And that by itself is a beautiful story. So before we get started, I just wanted to personally congratulate Kevin for what you have accomplished at Branchville. Incredible story. We're going to share a little bit more about how many people watched the chapters that we put together. And we got so much feedback from all over the world. Incredible story, incredible business case, how to impact a community through agriculture, through hemp, through daring ability. So congratulations to you. I'm going to move on with the bios. I'm checking quickly on the chat box if there is any question. It looks like we're fine. We're going to move on with the bios. Kevin Summers, the owner of Summers Farms, former CIO of several Fortune 50 companies. Kevin returned to his hometown and spent nearly 4 years repurchasing the land his great-grandfather owned to start farming and establish Summers Farms. Kevin received his Bachelor of Science degree in computer science from College of Charleston and an MBA from Duke University. Thank you so much, Kevin, again for being here today. Darren Farmer D. Jofi was a consultant in Branchville, is a consultant with Branchville, and is an owner in Farmer D Consulting, and an amazing individual. Farmer D is a nationally recognized biodynamic farmer, designer, speaker, entrepreneur, and educator, author of the acclaimed book, Citizen Farmers, The Biodynamic Way to Grow Healthy Food, Build Thriving Communities, and Give Back to the Earth. I strongly recommend the book. I was one of the first one that bought it and really loved the book. I actually, even after reading it, keep the book in my backpack at all times. Just love the book and your work as well. Darren has spent the past 25 years designing and building community farms and gardens all over the country. Thank you, Darren, for being here. Will Osted is the director of Branchville, is an executive vice president and creative director at the Paula Group. Will is a native New Yorker who spent his summers helping on his family farm in western Iowa. Will's expertise allowed the Branchville story come to life and has been instrumental for the Paula Group for over 18 years. I've been working with Will for 6 years and really enjoy working with him. Tremendous individual. And we have also Brian Shade in the panel. Brian is a senior product manager at Netafim USA. He's working for 33 years in the industry, from which 22 with Netafim USA. He has been instrumental to our success. He has been in multiple positions at Netafim USA and does amazing work for us throughout the years. So with that, I'm going to pass the microphone to Will, which will serve as our panel moderator today, and will take us from here.
Thank you, Zev. I made the cardinal mistake. I'm still making it on mute. So thank you for the introductions, and thank you for having me, and thanks for everyone making the time to join us today. So just a few quick things about Branchville. So when we first heard the story of Kevin Summers, it was clear that to me that this had all the makings of a great story. Teen boy leaves small rural farming town, becomes big-time corporate success, and then the natural progression of things, 3 decades later, returns to the family farm to take on what he calls the biggest challenge of his life, growing hemp. So in this series, we followed Kevin and his family from before the first seedlings were planted to literally the last day when the last few plants were being pulled out of the field and harvested. And during that time, we not only watched his hemp crop grow, but we also actually got to see Kevin grow. Not in height or weight, but in actual as a farmer. It changed from the beginning to the end. The change was really something to see. So I've heard some people have described this as sort of this true American story. And I never really thought about it, but when you look at the story, it's a story of entrepreneurialism, perseverance, and a pioneering spirit. And that's what's told in Branchville. And so I think they're right that this is what really America is about. And it really is sort of this true American story, which is not something that we initially set out to document. So since the release of this series began in January, it's been viewed by over 3 million people on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and it's continuing to grow at a rate of about 10 to 15,000 views per week. So today what we're going to do is we're going to watch a couple of highlights and listen to the stars of Branchville and answer any questions that you may have about the series, about growing hemp. It's all on the table. So feel free to submit your questions in the chat window as we go along, and we'll do our best to get to them and answer them. So let's start with the first short clip from the series, and then we're going to pick up the discussion on the other side.
So I'm sitting in Indiana at the football game, Purdue and TCU. We lost the game, but still I'm sitting there at the game with a record crowd of 70,000 people, and I'm pulling up my phone and I'm watering the field in Bowman with precision. I didn't have to worry about, did it get 10 gallons out? Did it get water? Did it get all the nutrients out? I plug it up, hit go, and I was able to watch it until it finished a cycle and went to the next one.
Farming takes up a lot of time. And it becomes something that can get in the way of you being with your family.
You bring back memories. My father and my mom would only come to one game a year. That was it.
When you play basketball?
Basketball and football.
Because they were stuck on the farm.
They were stuck on the farm.
How's that for a full cycle?
So I remember all that. So with all the technology we have, it makes it more exciting for people like the college students that were here to want to do this. Because if not, they just think of it as like I'm giving up my work, my life.
So, Kevin, the technology was a big theme in this, and not something that I necessarily expected right from day one. But you basically hit the ground running on technology and started talking about your vision. It was clear that you came into this with a specific goal of applying your technology background and creating a template essentially for farming. You've talked about a number of times, farming hemp in the region. I remember sitting at your brother's house before sunrise a few times filming, and you were having coffee with your iPad and your laptop, and you're sitting there and you're looking at the crops and looking at moisture levels and the irrigation timing and the systems and all that. How important was having access to that sort of automation and technology in your first season of growing hemp? Did it make it more complex? Did it make it less complex? Talk to me about how you used it and what it meant to you.
Well, first of all, let me just say thanks a lot for the opportunity to be here today, but also thanks a lot for the opportunity to work with you all over the past year. Because without the partnership from Zev and Brian and Will and Farmer D, it wouldn't have been possible. And also the team of people that work around me. So I don't view this as only Kevin, I view it as a team. So I definitely want to just recognize that. I would say technology was a thing that saved us last year. And kind of flipping over to this year, it's even more important this year than it was last year. Because of the investments that we put in place last year, we're getting the benefit. So I'm coming from you right now in one of our drying facilities that's in Branchville that has Wi-Fi, and probably people thought about that. Why was I putting Wi-Fi back out here in the middle of the country? And it's really a big benefit because we can sit here and have this video conference today with you all. And because of COVID and some of the social distancing, this is how I've been able to keep in contact with my team, but also practicing the social distancing which has made a world of a difference. And the technology, we were talking about this earlier. Last year, you saw that I did go to one of my son's games last year. Unfortunately, Big Ten football is not this year, but last year I left, Atlanta, where I spent some time there in May after he graduated from high school, and I didn't return until like November, other than going for one day to be able to go to a football game, and I was back the same day or the next day. Because of the technology this year, I'm still spending a lot of time in Branchville, but it's probably half of the time. Or for an example, the team, last year we were getting out at 5:30 in the morning and probably 8, 9 o'clock at night. This year we're probably getting here at 7 o'clock in the morning and leaving at 5 o'clock and not working on the weekends. And a lot of that is because of the technology that we put in place and the automation. And a couple things on that. And if you look at it, and I think the technology is the key. If you look at it in the state of South Carolina, probably about 200 people planted last year. And this year, only 30% of those people who planted last year are going to plant this year. And they're planting half of that in terms of they planted, 10 acres last year, they're planting 5 acres. Or if they planted 100 acres, they're planting 50, which is a problem. And I think a lot of that is because of the fact that the use of technology. And again, I've been in technology for 30 years. And some of the same practices that I've used in big companies, I'm using here. And probably the number one technology we're using is analytics. And what do I mean by analytics? There's a lot of input to make this crop work. Probably one of the most challenging things I know I've done, and a lot of other farmers have done, and that's why 70% of the people are not doing this again. Some of the analytics or input, you got to look at genetics, you got to look at THC and CBD, you got to look at irrigation and nutrients and soil and weather. I counted there's probably over 3,000 to 5,000 data points over the course of a season, which is extremely complex for you to manage. So having some technology to be able to do that analysis and make recommendations on how much water you need or how much nutrients you need is critical. And I'll give you an example. Last year, the technology that we had with our irrigation system saved the crop because it was a major drought in South Carolina. So we were watering, basically you got about 2 inches of rain in the course of 2 to 3 months. So we were watering 3 times, 2 for water, 1 for feeding. And that was a data point that we had to understand from the soil and the rain. This year, we've gotten probably 10 inches of rain in 2 weeks. So now it's a different variable of I'm not using the irrigation system as much for water. I'm using that irrigation system for the nutrients. And some of those variables are now more of how much the minimum amount of water I can put in to make sure I get the nutrients out. And then what is the soil type for those different fields and genetics. So that's why I say technology is, I don't think you can do this with the complexity of all the variables that you have to manage without, the analytics and the technology that helps us, be successful.
Yeah, and at least not do it with the success that you had, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But you didn't just have a good season; you had, I think, one of the best seasons in the country, from what I understand, in terms of some of the levels of oil that you saw in your plants. Brian, what kind of technology did we see in Branchville and automation? Can you give us a little background on what Kevin was using and what it allowed him to do?
Well, when I first met with Kevin and found out about his technology background and saw the challenges that lay before him at the Branchville farm, I think there was 9 fields, wasn't there, Kevin? Kind of spread out.
Absolutely.
And then the Bowman operation.
Correct.
I honestly was concerned. Kevin hadn't been on the farm in years, is what he told me, and he was taking on a big project. And so he was kind enough to allow us to convince him to put in an NMC junior controller with NMC Air so he could access it remotely. And then the next step was the soil moisture system. We started off with 3 sensors last year from a company called Centec, and that allowed Kevin to monitor his irrigation system through the NMC Air and adjust it according to what he saw with the Centec sensors. We've looked at the soils. Kevin and I have talked about the different soil types and how to water them appropriately. And he did a phenomenal job. That's what it boils down to.
Right, Darren. So technology, you're sort of on I guess I would say the leading edge of pushing farming to I don't know if it's the next level, a different level, I would say. Some different approaches to farming. You deal with a lot of innovative farmers and some of the consulting that you do as well. Kevin obviously fell into that grouping as well. What are you seeing from the ag tech standpoint in terms of how that's influencing younger farmers? One of the issues I know with farms, and we saw this in South Carolina, Kevin, as well over the summer, is that the young people aren't sticking around because, quite frankly, there's no reason to. They're getting out of the rural areas and going and getting big office jobs or whatever it might be, but they're definitely not sticking around in farming. Is technology changing that? Are you seeing that happen? Is it becoming, do I dare say, is it making farming more fun?
Is it making farming more fun? I think it's making farming more viable for people. I think a lot of young people that are getting into agriculture have more of a technology background, just generally growing up in this generation, and are more inclined to use technology than older farmers who kind of have their ways. And so I do think it's actually a really great tool. And I've seen technology being used in a number of different ways. There's a lot of new apps for crop planning, for example, for marketing and distribution, for managing your customers and logistics. So that's one area where I've seen a lot of innovation, even in the smaller, more diversified community-based farms. Farmers end up doing everything, right? They end up having to do not just what we typically think of as the physical work, but you're also running a business, and you're doing all the things that come with running a business: accounting, marketing, staffing, and so the more you can. The more you can reduce the amount of things you have to do on a day-to-day basis to keep the farm going, the more likely you are to be successful, the more likely you are to avoid burnout, and the more likely you are to keep a healthy work-life balance, right? When I was a young farmer, working 18-hour days, it was not sustainable, and running around the fields, turning on manual irrigation valves and moving sprinklers and just the myriad of tasks that have to get done on a day-to-day basis. It's a lot for any person. And so I think the more technology can help farmers spend the time doing the things that are more less kind of grueling labor that takes time, I think the more it will free them up to do the things like managing their business, doing their marketing, being creative, engaging the community. So yeah, I think technology is an important tool in the toolkit. I think there are a lot of people that tend to resist it a little bit, because part of why you get into farming is to get away from technology. So there's a balance. There's a balance there. You don't have to spend all your time on the computer. But you can still incorporate technology into your farming systems to help increase your efficiencies, reduce the amount of labor, improve the economics, and the sustainability. And like Kevin said, there's a lot of data and metrics. And I think more and more of what farmers are going to be able to do is demonstrate the benefits that they're contributing to things like soil health and carbon and other metrics, that if we can have those metrics at hand, it's easier to make the case for why farming in certain ways is better than others, and can actually be a contributor to more climate resiliency and reducing our carbon footprint.
Right. Kevin, I want to just throw back to you real quick. One follow-up on that. So you said that this year it's a wet year. You're using your SDI system to deliver more nutrients than actual water. It's needed more for the nutrients value. Last year, I saw you visibly shocked in some ways that the way that these particular plants would respond to when they got fed. Literally, we said, I think you said at one point, like overnight, you'll see a difference.
Right.
What did you? And I know that you got sort of a self chemistry degree last year, and all this stuff. What would you say was the key takeaway in terms of the nutrients and delivering them to the plants, and what you learned about being patient, knowing when the plant needs nutrients, knowing when it doesn't need nutrients. I guess what would be your advice to farmers that are farming hemp, and what you've learned?
Yeah, I think the part that I learned from Brian was about the soil, and then also learning about my mom was a science teacher, and I probably didn't pay enough attention to her, so I had to go back and learn all that stuff that she was talking about when she was growing flowers, or when my father was growing, on the farming side, because they did all that. They just did it through experience. Where I'm a type of person, I try to do it in terms of how do I analyze it, and I think, and then once you understand that, what makes the plant. I mean, we can get an inch of growth or 2 inches of growth a day. And that's what we're learning right now, and it's based on those analytics. So what I've learned, the first start is the soil, and that's exactly what Brian and I started at the base. What is the soil, and what's in the soil, and what type of soil type, and how much water can it hold? And then the second thing is the nutrients in the soil. So we do soil tests at the beginning of the year and at the end of the season. And then we apply, compost at the end of the season that gives us a good fresh start for the season. And then once we get into the season, then it's more of, we test every week to determine what we need to give the plant during the stages of vegetation phase and flowering stage. And we test for about, believe it or not, I think there's roughly about 40 to 50 different major and micronutrients. And that's what I've learned to really make this plant grow 1 inch to 2 inches. You got to understand the soil. You've got to understand the nutrients that it requires, and obviously the water that it requires. Those are the three things I would say that are the difference makers.
Yeah, and I want to talk about your soil a little bit later with Farmer D. I know he had when he first showed up there, he had some strong objections to it. Was almost appalled that you could possibly grow anything, and it was essentially looked like sand, a beach. But you guys did some things to make it work. But we'll talk about that a little later. I want to go to the next clip here, and then we'll pick it up again on the other side with more conversation.
Basically, what we're doing is that we have a little problem. We have a lot of flowers and buds out in the field that we got to get harvested and get them dry. So we're getting ready to put together our drying facility. The best way to dry is to air dry. There's a lot of machinery that you could have, but the problem with some of that machinery is that, yes, it does thousands of pounds per hour, but the problem is that you lose the CBD oil. If you just hang dry it, you could need something like 50 to 60,000 square feet of a barn or a building to be able to hang dry all 80 acres. So that's why that's the best method of doing it, is hang drying it. So the other option is you have some kind of machinery that dries it and does about 1,000 pounds in an hour. But the problem with that, you may lose. A friend of mine just lost 20% of his CBD count by just using a peanut trailer. And in probably about a day, he lost 50% of the revenue. Boom, gone. And you don't know that until after you've dried it with the peanut trailer. And then you find out, and then you go to the lab and you get it tested. And about 3 days later, when you get your lab results back, you've lost 50% of your revenue because you dried them out too much. So with this solution here, we're trying to retain the oil, which retains the revenue, which retains the quality, but also reduce the timeline.
So this is a part of the process that I'm not sure if you totally anticipated what this meant when you first started. I know that I didn't. Traditionally farming, a lot of times, corn, soybean farmers in that area, you pull your crop out of the field and you take it to the silo or store it. This is almost like part two. It's part one is, growing the crop. It can all go from good to really bad in a matter of 24 hours. And you learned that, I think, firsthand in a couple of cases. The drying is critical. Tell us about what you learned and why is the drying so critical?
It's something that people overlook. You know, the key part of it is that, to your point, it takes about anywhere from 4 to 6 months to get this crop ready for harvest, from the time that you plant it to the time that you can harvest it. So in 24 hours or 36 hours, you can lose everything that you worked so hard for in 6 months. And that's what we learned last year, from the standpoint, and we made it through, but it was a big challenge, because a couple things happen. You have to really forecast what your drying capacity needs are in terms of how many acres, when they're ready, and how much can you dry at one time. So we looked at multiple solutions, and we have tobacco barns that is what we've been using. And it's very delicate because of the fact that if you leave it in there too long, it'll be dry, but you've lost your CBD count. So you can take your CBD count, you know, four percentages down or more just because you dried it too much. And then on the flip side, you know, you have to dry it and get your moisture between 7 and 10, because if you don't dry it enough, then you go to store it, and in a couple months you look up and you got mold, and now your whole, you know, bag it's destroyed. So drying is extremely, probably the most critical, other than growing it. Drying is probably the area that you can lose fairly quickly. And like I said, it only takes about 36 hours to lose your whole crop because you didn't dry correctly. So that's another area where we use technology, where we check, you know, the temperature. We check how long it stays in the drying barn. We check, you know, when is it ready at the moisture level to come out, as well. And then obviously, you know, how we store it.
And in South Carolina,
Yes.
it's known to be a little humid at times, to say the least. You're sitting right now in a climate-controlled building that you built on your facility.
Right.
So talk about how do you keep the humidity
Yes.
out? How do you deal with that?
And that's where the localization comes in as well, because of the fact that in other parts of the world, I mean, you think about Colorado, where the majority of the hemp is grown in the world, they dry it out in the field. And they can just store it in a barn that doesn't have any temperature control. Well, on the East Coast, we have to deal with a lot of humidity. So this is definitely a pole barn, as you can see the barn, the wood behind me, but it's all temperature control and humidifiers in it. So we had to put both in here because you have to deal with the humidity. And so you have to keep that humidity down about 50, 60%, and keep the temperature down to roughly around 60% as well. And that's extremely important because we've sold a lot of our product, but some of it we had, you know, 6 months later. And we open up the containers, it smells just as fresh as in 6 months later as it was the day we harvested. And that's because of the drying and the storage technique.
Right. So Farmer D, you were like a kid in a candy store last summer. It was like a dream come true for you to the legalization of hemp, something you've been advocating for a long time. To actually see it come to life, you know, I think we filmed some hours upon hours, and not everything made it into the final series of you basically just almost reflecting with your newfound hemp plant friends out there. We tried to leave you alone a little bit sometimes. We know you want to get personal with them, but what did you learn in your first season like this, where you actually were able to see this happen from beginning to end? And how are you applying that to helping other farmers now, growing what is, for all intents and purposes, a pretty challenging crop? A lot can go wrong.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning my love affair with hemp. You know, I've been really interested in the plant for 35 years. I've always been a huge advocate and really frustrated that hemp has been, you know, alienated, you know, from society and agriculture and industries for so long. It just makes no sense. So it's really exciting. And when I started working with Kevin, and he was looking at different crops to grow, and the goal of, you know, revitalizing kind of agriculture and the economy and the community where he grew up, and bringing technology to it. I thought, what better crop than hemp now that it's legal, and it just become legal as we started exploring options, with the caveat that there's a lot of risk because, it hasn't been grown in 80 years and we don't know a lot about, how the plant grows out in the fields in Branchville, South Carolina. And there's not a lot of genetics and research and, inputs, so much that is unknown. But in some ways, that's what made it so attractive and appealing, is to be at the frontier, to be at the front line of innovation with a crop that has so much promise to solve a lot of issues. Agricultural crop, as an agricultural crop, it's a lot less dependent on chemicals, and as an agricultural crop that provides a lot of opportunities for industry and sustainability, addressing a lot of issues with plastics. And we know, so that was very exciting when I saw that truck pull up and the 70,000 hemp starts come out, and for me to actually plant the first hemp plant in the ground in my whole, I've grown a lot of different crops over the 30 years of getting into farming, and what an exciting moment, right? I think there were a lot of challenges that we came across. It was actually, I look back on the whole experience, and the amount of times where I thought the whole thing was going to fall apart were several, and yet somehow, by God's grace, by the support of Netafim, by Kevin's grit, by our collective experience, we managed to pull through. And one of the challenges that stood out to me was Kevin was really committed to keeping an organic practices throughout the whole process. And we said we want to innovate and we want to be organic. We want to move away from the heavy chemical dependent ag that's in the area and build the soil. And we got to a point, I remember there was a real pivotal point where the irrigation was not working. We couldn't get the organics into the irrigation system, and it was creating it wasn't even allowing us to irrigate, never mind get the nutrients out. It was, basically clogging the system. And there was a moment where it was like, what, just go to, the conventional fertilizers. Some of the advice was, we know it works. We know it goes through the lines. We know the plant will respond. If you want to save your investment, just go with what we know. And I was almost convinced, and I'm a die-hard organic guy. And Kevin said, no, we're committed. We're going to figure this out. And I think one of the big breakthroughs that we made was figuring out how to use organics in the fertigation system. It's not necessarily designed for it. I think Netafim, also realized this was a big challenge, that across all crops, and trying to do organic regenerative farming where we're improving the soil using organics instead of salt-based fertilizers. Organics are sticky. They're challenging to go through little drip lines. But with the help of Eden Blue Gold and the team that was advising us on the fertility side, we put together the tank system with the aeration that got the nutrients soluble enough, and once to see that fertility blend move through the system and then hit those plants, and boom, everything went. Not only had we done NPK, sure, they would have grown, but we would have had all kinds of other issues, right? And instead, we ended up with an incredible success story of how you can grow organically using the technology of fertigation and automation, and that was a big breakthrough, I thought. And it's an exciting, game changer, because when you're trying to farm at scale, when you're farming 80 acres, it's one thing if you've got an acre or 2 or 5 to get organics out there more manually, but you can't do that at scale. And so, to be able to put 80 acres of irrigation out and the right amount of fertility and the right kind of fertility, organic fertility, was a huge moment of I think accomplishment for all of us as a team. And I would hope that hemp or other crops, now Kevin has an infrastructure system and a model that he can share of how you can build soil fertility and grow crops organically using the automation and technology of the Netafim system and the fertigation system.
Yeah, Brian. I want to ask you, dovetailing off of that, your experience with hemp farming goes well beyond Branchville. You work with a lot of hemp farmers and have worked with a lot of hemp farmers all across the United States, but particularly in the Southeast. What would you say is, what does somebody who's thinking about getting into this? Because really, there is no such thing right now as a very, very experienced hemp farmer. We're talking 2-3 years, 4 years at the most here, and there's still a lot of learning from what I see. What are you seeing out there with the farmers that you're talking to? What are some of the surprises they're seeing, some of the mistakes? I guess what would be your number one piece of advice if somebody's thinking about dedicating some acres to hemp this year or next year?
I guess the main thing would be to be cautious and start early. There's a lot of bad information that's out there. Find some reputable people, cross-check the information, and if it doesn't sound right, check it again. And I think, Farmer D, nothing but good things to say. And Kevin did a lot of research on his own, aside from what he was being told. And he tried to advise some people close to him, I know, that were getting some bad information. And some of them didn't listen and didn't do very well. He also had his mind made up on some of the things he was going to do come hell or high water, regardless of what somebody did tell him. And he did it right, and he did it well, and he was successful. So just research, ask questions and cross-check.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because I saw all of you shaking your heads in affirmation of that there's a lot of bad information out there. This is an industry that's brand new. It's not necessarily totally set up yet to go from planting to processing to selling to all of that in a streamlined manner, like some of the other row crops or traditional crops that are or have been. I know, Kevin, you had talked about, I think we got it on film, and then we'd also talked about it off film, but that was one of your big challenges, is that there isn't really a blueprint yet for what you do after you finish growing, or who you buy seed from, or who's reputable and who's not. Has that changed at all in the past year? Do you see that changing?
No, I don't think it's changed. I think but it's the number one reason why 70% of the people in South Carolina are not planting, and 90% of the people in Colorado are not planting this year. And quite frankly, it's a shame, because of the fact that there's a lot of benefits this plant can offer to the world. And I think it's two things on that you just said, the bad information. And there's a lot of people out there telling you things that are not based on fact or based on data. So, what I'm excited about, that, because, I have the big vision. And I mean, Farmer D and I had to kind of bring it down to how much can you execute? But, my big vision is how do I rise up the community and from where I came from? And that was the farming piece was the first part. But also it was about how do I help with health and wellness in a rural area? How do I help with, my background is in sports as well. So that's where I'm excited about the next step. And to your point, is helping those farmers in the area with farm services. And we're doing that with about 10 farmers today, and giving them the right information and giving them the technology and saying, here's how you do it. And I'm never going to guarantee you're going to get, the 20-25% of CBD content that we got last year, but I can probably guarantee you're going to have a crop that you can get a good yield off, and you'll, be able to sustain yourself and do it again next year. And that's where I get the excitement from, because, one of our farmers right now has, 4,000 acres, and they're planting about 60 acres with us. And the first 2 years, they've completely bombed, and they didn't want to do it again. And now they're, looking well in their crop, and, but they're following the process. And sometimes it's hard to believe, because there's so much other bad information out there. So sometimes when you say stick to organic, farmers who've done corn, and they're like, hey, you need to put some nitrogen to it. And I'm like, no, stick to the plan, because there's other micronutrients that are you have to be balanced. And the real reason is because of the goal of, I'm not looking at this just how do you farm it. I'm looking at how do you put it in products that back to the rise of the community in terms of, this product can have a lot of beneficial use for immunity, for pain, for sleep, anxiety. And I know that some of the products that we're bringing to market soon, I want to know what's in it because, there's a study that the FDA did that says only 17% of the products that are on the marketplace today, what's on the label is in the bottle, only 17%. And that's a problem. So I think if we can teach farmers the right way to do this, stay organic, know what's in it, then you can put the right stuff in the bottle so that people can get the benefits from this as a great plant, and that's organic. So those are the kind of things that really gets me excited about, the Bee Rise products, because Bee Rise, the B stands for Branchville and Rise Up stands for the community. There's communities all across the world like Branchville that need this focus on health and wellness and pain, and this crop can be great, but we have to make sure we do it right because it is going into people's bodies.
Right, and you're actually you brought up the point. You're going to be taking it all the way from soup to nuts, I guess to say, where you're going to be producing the product, and there's a website too. I think that you're Bee Rise. What's the website address?
BeeRiseCBD.com.
Okay. Farmer D, I got a question for you. So somebody's asking here in our audience, COVID-19. You're a big advocate for urban farming. You wrote a book about it. You speak about it a lot. How's that been affected by this? Has it been negatively affected, positively affected, not affected at all? The community gardens, which were a big trend heading into before the pandemic. What are you seeing?
I mean, it's been an incredible eye-opener on a number of fronts for people about our vulnerabilities in our food system, inequities, in people in our society who are not as healthy due to economic, socioeconomic situations. There's obviously it's shown the vulnerabilities of our Native American, indigenous communities, of our lower income and people of color. It's been a real wake up for a lot of people around some of what we've known have been issues in our food system and in our injustices across a lot of different aspects of society, but I think COVID's really illuminated it in a big way. And one of the things I've noticed is, and I've been doing this for over 20 years and been really passionate about where our food comes from and how we farm, how we consume, and a lot of it's around education and awareness, right? So I think when it comes to urban agriculture, it's really about teaching people about how to grow healthy food, how to eat healthy food, how to be healthier, so that you are more resilient in times like this. Not just personally resilient, from a health perspective, but also more resilient as a society. And so it's been interesting, my work, both in the citizen farmer side of what I do, but also in the agri-hood and building and designing communities around farms has really exploded in the last 6 months. It was already, awareness was already on the rise, but I think COVID really put fuel to the fire, so to speak, that we need to redesign the way we live. It's not sustainable the way we live right now. And we've kind of been forced due to COVID to grapple with some of those issues. And so I think we have an opportunity, and just, to what Kevin was saying in Branchville, and one of the things that really inspired me to work with Kevin was there are so many rural communities around this country and around the world that are struggling. They're economically depressed. The health issues around obesity and diabetes are scary. I mean, it's terrible. And so you have vulnerable communities, very vulnerable, food insecure communities, economically disadvantaged communities. The agriculture in these communities is leading to a lot of health issues because of the pollution in the water and the air quality. So, I mean, there's a lot of issues that this project addresses, or at least I think really looks at and attempts to address. And hemp is interesting, right? I mean, hemp is a really interesting crop when it comes to, better alternatives to a lot of the commodity crops like soy and cotton and corn that are lighter on the land, less impactful on the negative side in the communities where the crops grow, and also more impactful on the other end of people who are consuming them, right? Hemp is one of the greatest health foods on the planet. It's a superfood, and it's also an incredible medicine, and it's also an incredible fiber, right? So if we can help address some of the agricultural and health issues that we face across both urban and rural communities with better agricultural practices, crops like hemp that are going to improve the health of the soil and the health of communities, then I think we really need to prioritize it. So, in short, I mean, I think COVID obviously has shown a lot of the vulnerabilities that we have as a society, and it's a wake-up call for a lot of people. And it's an opportunity, right? Because we've slowed down enough, and we have an opportunity to rethink the way that we ramp back up. And we can be ramping back up, not in the same ways that we were doing things, but in different ways that rethink a lot of these things that have that led us to the health and environmental issues and social injustice issues that we're facing.
Right, Brian, I have a question for you. I want to get we had a question from some of the audience, but I want to squeeze this one in real quick. Then we'll get back to our audience questions. You used a technical term, I remember at one point when you showed up on the farm during our filming to refer to Kevin's soil. You said, we call it sand.
Yes.
And it's sand. I mean, it looks like a beach to me. I'm curious from your experience in irrigating that type of soil. Is that more challenging? What are some of the challenges with it? Obviously, drainage is a challenge. It drains out real quick. But is there a case to be made that you might have better control of the nutrients in an environment like that? Or what kind of challenges does sand present?
Okay, so my background comes from growing citrus in Florida and working with the growers down in Florida that were doing tomatoes and peppers and strawberries. And anybody that's been to Florida knows what sand is without any organics, okay? And basically, we looked at the irrigation systems in these sandy soils as if you were growing hydroponically. There's nothing there. It's just a structure to hold a plant up, and you want to take everything through the tube to the plant, the water that it needs, the food that it needs, and all the care. And actually, in a lot of cases, it's a better growing medium than some of the other soils that I typically deal with, because it does aerate well with drip irrigation. It does transport the water and the nutrients well. But at the same time, and Kevin learned this pretty early on, if you do not irrigate it right, your water will go down right through it like a sieve. And so it's very important to understand how water moves in a sandy soil. I love it as a growing medium if it's managed properly. And that's where the automation, the controllers, the fertilizer injectors, and the field valves come in to play, because you just, like Farmer D and Kevin were talking about in the one clip, this can be a full-time job, just running your irrigation system. And the best thing that a farmer can put in the field is his footprints, going out and looking at his crop, because the plant will tell you everything it needs if you look at it. But if you're up there having to turn valves and operate knobs and turn on pumps, you can't be in the field doing the important work. So the automation, and I was explaining this to some growers this week, it's a tool. It's just one tool in the box. And if you don't use it, you don't get the value out of it. And if you do use it, it's your best friend. And as Kevin mentioned, it lets you go home at night. It'll wake you up if you want it to. If something goes off and you get an alarm, it'll call you on your phone and tell you that there's a problem. So it really takes a lot of pressure off of the grower and lets him focus on the farm and not the mundane stuff that a computer can take care of.
Right. Right. Farmer D, I need the abbreviated version of this, but I saw you. We mentioned soil, which leads you to one of your favorite topics in the world, which is compost. And right from day one, you were a big advocate of compost. We showed up there on day one of filming, and there was a big pile of compost there, and we were right next to it. So give us the quick version, because I have a question I want to get to from the audience here. But of what did you do with the compost? What kind of compost was it? And it actually, we saw some real results from it in some areas. Just as simple as, I remember at one point Kevin took a shovel and a pickup and took some and just started shoveling it at some of the plant bases, because he saw that at the areas where there was compost, those plants were radically different than where there wasn't, just from that difference.
It's funny. I sent a picture to my good friend, who's the largest hemp farmer in Canada, and I sent him a picture. I planted my first hemp plant, and he said, "Why are you planting in sand?" The picture, it looked like we were planting at the beach, and we used a really high quality organic compost. I remember, my compost partner of many years is not too far from Kevin at Longwood Plantation, and we've been making biodynamic compost together for a decade. And, it was at least 1.5, maybe twice the cost of some of the other composts on the market. But, and I won't, have the time, but like, not all compost is created equal. There's a big differentiation. You really want to do your research when you're shopping for compost. But our philosophy was that we were building soil, right? So we brought in a lot of compost. I think Kevin would probably say we probably should have put down the full amount that I recommended. I kind of gave a minimum and a max, and we kind of went somewhere in the middle, maybe closer to the minimum. And then we added organic fertilizer, a granular fertilizer. So as a baseline, to Brian's point, in sandy soil, the fertigation, it's almost like you're growing in hydroponics. However, you want to put that biology down early so that you're feeding the microbes when you are feeding organics into a sandy soil, that you're building biology, you're building organic matter. And so we basically started with, I think it was 5 to 10 tons per acre. You can go up to 50 tons an acre if you have the resources, but of compost, and we're doing 80 acres, so that adds up to a lot of money. So we put down the compost, and we pre-blended an organic granular fertilizer that was customized based on the soil test. So we got a baseline soil test. We found a really high quality compost. We blended in a good organic fertilizer that had a good ratio mix for that soil. And after that, it was pumping the organic nutrients in and feeding that soil. We're not feeding the plant, we're really feeding that soil. And then at the top of that, throughout the season, as you mentioned, we would side dress. So when there were plants that needed a little extra boost, we'd go out, throw a scoop of compost down around the base, and you would immediately see, you're feeding that biology, basically bringing life into those sandy soils, which in Kevin's case, hadn't been farmed well, hadn't been farmed much in a long time, and were just neglected.
Right. Got a couple of questions. We've got a couple minutes left. A couple questions for Kevin's, and one of them's actually a good closing out question, I believe. But first question is, and we got this question a lot from people actually on the farm as well last year, the plastic mulch. So at one point, the question is, at one point, Kevin said that he would never plant without plastic mulch. I heard that a number of times. Why is that? And is it a challenge to dispose of that in South Carolina?
Oh, so that's a great question. And let me explain why I would say that is because it's back to the soil. And one of the things that the soil does do well in, it grows a bunch of weeds. So unless you get that soil conditioned organically with compost, which could take 5 to 7 years, you're going to grow a bunch of weeds, and the weeds will take away all the nutrients from the plants. Unless you're out there hoeing, and that's pretty complex to do that over 100+ acres. So we use the plastic, and yes, it is a job after the harvest in, let's say, October, November. It probably takes us another month or two to pull the plastic up and dispose of it. So, but I would tell you, unless you have good soil, organic soil, or you're going to be out there with a manual labor every day, it's extremely difficult in certain parts of the country that you have a lot of weed control to do it without plastic.
Right. And next question from one of the audience members is, so prior to harvesting, what was if you had to choose, not an easy question, I guess, but what was the biggest lesson that you learned last year that sticks with you as this crop was growing and as you're tending to it?
I think the biggest part that lesson learned was it's almost back to, I'll say the two-part, back to Brian and Farmer D. One, make sure you got a good source for information with trusted partners. Because if you don't get the right information, you'll go down the wrong path. And I think the second thing is, really focus on organic. And that was a big decision that we had to make. And this year, we don't have any problems with getting the nutrients out organically. Because again, if your goal is to deliver, like our goal is to deliver honest products with real results, whether it's through us selling it or selling the oil to someone else. And I think that's the differentiator, because of the fact that what happened last year was there was so much product on the marketplace. It was oversupply, and all of it wasn't great quality. So now the price have come. So I think the biggest lessons learned is, take the time, get good information, get your right partners in place, and grow with quality so that you put the best quality in the bottom.
Right. Last question, and probably the most important one. This is from an audience member. How is your brother Jasper doing? And is he still out there working? And I'll add on to that. Is he retired yet?
No, I think, it's back to the point of, just the technology is giving him time back, because this was clearly not a retirement job for him. It was, in the video, he talks about he's committed to 3 years, and I was asking for 5. But I think now we can do 5 because of the fact that, year 2 is so much easier because of the technology and the experiences. So I think I'll keep him for 5 years, and he's just been a big blessing because of the fact that it allows me to go off and do other parts of the business. And I still do technology consulting as well because of, my brother is here, and I can still check in because I have the technology to do it remotely as well. But he's out there, working right now.
As you're sitting in the climate control.
Yeah, exactly. Well, he has a climate control John Deere tractor. So.
That's great. Thank you. I'm going to throw it back to Zev here in a second, but I just wanted to give you a chance one more time. So Kevin, if somebody wanted to contact you, reach out to you about the farm services, about the B-Rise product, if you want to give that website again where they can find more information.
Feel free to email me directly at Kevin at BRISE.com, or you can, go to our website in terms of, like I said, BRISECBD.com. But I love to get emails, no problems with that. I've gotten emails from, I don't know how people catch me up on LinkedIn or emails and ask me questions, and I love it, because of the fact that my goal is to see this crop be successful. And, I don't want farmers out there, where this could be an opportunity, and because of bad information, it becomes a loss opportunity or loss financially.
Right. And Farmer D, when you're not running from fires up there in Northern California, and hope you and your family are safe, where can people find you and contact you if needed?
Yeah, well, I just launched a podcast with NetFM called Citizen Farmers. So citizenfarmers.com if you want to tune into the podcast. FarmerD.com if you want to learn more about my consulting work in agri-hoods and hemp. And appreciate the opportunity to partner with NetFM and to work with you, Kevin. It's been such a joy, and really excited for the future of Branchville and hemp. I'm excited to be a part of it.
Yeah, it was a summer like none other, and definitely memorable. So if that's it,
COVID, we could actually travel and make it happen.
Yeah, no kidding. I'm going to throw it back to Zev just to close this out, and thank you everybody for participating. Zev.
Thank you, Will, for moderating. Thank you so much, Kevin, and congratulations for all the achievements and tremendous work in Branchville. Thank you so much, Farmer D, for your friendship, for your partnership. We enjoy seeing your work. Thank you, Brian, for all what you do for NetFM and all our customers, growers, dealers, and so on. Thank you for everybody joining today. If you have any question for NetFM, we have a website. There is a page here at the chat box. And I also want to invite all growers that joined or dealers that joined from Dakotas to Arizona, from Carolinas to California, from Chile to South Africa. Please contact Netafim. We love helping. We love getting involved in these type of projects, learning things together with you, and being vested in your success. So thank you again. Thank you to Alisa Luna, superstar at Netafim in marketing, for putting all these events together. Thank you all for joining again. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Will.
All right.